For European colonizers, the image of a white Jesus served a dual purpose. In this session, we're going to talk about the relationship between power and images so that we can get a greater understanding of how the enemy used the power of an image to subjugate the children of Israel. Let's begin by saying there was a reason the children of Israel were told in Leviticus 26:1 not to make graven images or to set up any image of stone in the land. In fact, the second commandment warned us not to make any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. This was one of the things that set Israel apart from the other nations. They were never supposed to bow down to images made with hands. So obviously, graven images, whether they are sculpted or painted, represents a powerful weapon used by the kingdom of darkness to bring about the destruction of Yah's people. Now let's take a look at this from Psalm 101:3. It says, I will set no wicked thing before mine eyes. Why is he saying this? He obviously knew about the eye gates and how it could allow wicked imagery in that could be a hindrance when you're on the path of righteousness. This is telling us that things we set before our eyes are extremely important. In fact, Messiah told us in Matthew 6:22-23 that the light is the body of the eye. What does that mean? It's a window or a door to let things in. It's a gateway or entry point. It goes on to say, if therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. But if thine eye be evil, thy whole body shall be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in thee be darkness, how great is that darkness? So again, things that we place before our eyes are important. I'm going to read an excerpt from this NPR article, and it's saying U 2.0, the mind's eye. It says many idioms in English draw a connection between what we see and what we do. We're told, keep your eye on the prize, set your sights high. I saw that coming. So this author, Emily Balcetis, she's a psychology professor at New York University, says that there's a deep truth to these sayings. She's saying our visual system and our behavior are linked. Our visual system and our behavior are linked. She says we can use our sight to help us make better decisions and reach our goals. A hidden secret about goal pursuit is that what we see is really tied to what we think, what we decide, and what we do, she says. So basically, science is now discovering what was known during ancient times. Various Bible passages confirm that. In 2 Corinthians 3:18, it talks about how we are transformed by things we see. It speaks of being transformed or changed into the same image from one degree of glory to another when we behold the glory of Yah. Why do you think our ancestors were told to keep the laws and commandments before them? Paul talked about being transformed by renewing the mind. So one of the ways things enter our mind is through sight. Just look at it in the natural. Why are more and more people addicted to pornography? We can simply look at what is constantly placed before our eyes through the media outlets. There's a connection. Now, if you understand all of that, then you should also understand that the white Jesus image was a deliberate brainwashing tactic. But we need to dig deeper to understand why and how it came to be. We talked last time about Eusebius of Caesarea, known as the father of Christian church history, and he was a key figure in the development of replacement theology. He had a close association with Constantine, and there's more to uncover regarding his impact on Christian images. Some of the leading defenders of religious icons pointed to his writings during the iconoclastic controversy. Now, let's make sure we understand what the iconoclastic controversy was all about. It was a dispute over the use of religious images or the icons in the Byzantine Empire during the 8th and 9th centuries. So the iconoclasts were the people who rejected the use of the images. They objected to icon veneration or worship based on what is written in the Old Testament and the prohibition against images in the Ten Commandments. So let's dig into this and see how and why our enemies used graven images to control and subjugate. This information comes from ResearchGate and it's entitled Ancestors as Icons: The Lives of Hebrew Saints in Eusebius's Preparatio Evangelica. It says biographical representations held powerful sway over the imagination of pagans and Christians alike in the late Roman world. Written lives could embody virtue, exemplify vice, evince a proper sense of the sacred, and articulate notions of authority and power, as in the social, political, and divine power. It says literary portraits of holy men and sometimes women possess the capacity to shape the world and lives of late antique readers. Such representations might also provide powerful mechanisms of legitimation within the arguments developed for particular philosophical or theological positions. Apologetic texts, which attempted to construct a defensible identity for Christianity in often bitterly polemical response to Greek and Jewish opponents, could provide an apt context for the embodiment of an idolized or idealized identity within the contours of a lived life. So they use what was called hagiographical impulse, which is the inclination towards defining piety or the virtues or what was holy through the literary portrayal of a paradigmatic person. Now, what this is saying is that they were using pictures and images of a person to define what is pious, what is virtuous, what is holy. And you all know the saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Just think about it. Back in the day, there were some who wouldn't dare deface an image or picture of white Jesus. That was sacrilegious. But the other thing they did with these icons was to define supremacy. So this Preparatio Evangelica and the other works of Eusebius were useful in helping to shape the Christian identity. Now, what are the effects centuries later? The world believes that everyone represented in the Old and New Testaments were Europeans. As strange as it may seem, they will admit that those people were Semites, but because they've been so successful with the ruse using imagery, people automatically assume then that Semitic people were Europeans. The icing on the cake is presenting those of European ancestry as the chosen people. Do you see how powerful images can be? Let's go on. It goes on to say that it was Eusebius's retelling of the history of the world and its nations, in particular the Phoenicians, Egyptians, Greeks, Hebrews, and Israelites, that lies at the crux of his apologetic method. It tells us that Book 7 is the crux of the Preparatio's entire argument. Why? Because it is focusing on the ancient ethnos of the Hebrews. These were the ancient friends of Yah, whose lives of ascetic purity and spiritual illumination embodied all the characteristics of piety and wisdom that the narratives of Phoenician, Egyptian, and Greek origins had lacked. Are you understanding why they place so much importance on this man's writings? So Eusebius remarked, he says, nothing at all has yet been found among any of the nations like the good provided us by the Hebrews. So it goes on to say, throughout the Preparatio, Eusebius had evinced a concern for relying on the indigenous sources of the various nations that figure in his argument. The case for the Hebrews was no different. So Eusebius is quoted as saying, we ought to observe the ways of the forefathers of the Hebrews from no other source than a native one, since we learned those of the Egyptians and those of the Phoenicians from their own sources. So this author says the writings of Moses were, for Eusebius, the most important and most ancient of the indigenous Hebrew sources. Moses had undertaken the task of commemorating the lives and thought of the ancient Hebrews at a time when they were about to be forgotten by their wayward descendants. And we have to ask, why did the descendants forget their history? It was due to the slave trades and being trafficked around the world. I'm going to share some excerpts from this journal article from Academia EDU so that you can see that there was some pushback regarding the use of religious icons. The article is entitled Overview on Iconophile and Iconoclastic Attitudes Towards Images in Early Christianity and Late Antiquity. It says, when a civil war was instigated over the icons, it became obvious that Christians began to question the cultural and religious significance the public use of images had developed up to the 8th century. But it was, after all, not the image as such, but its veneration, the worship, that brought up the long conflict of iconoclasm and divided Byzantine society. During this controversies, two parties formed, iconophiles and iconoclasts, which fought to accumulate an extensive selection of patristic and historical evidence in support of their cause. Now here it's going to talk about how the Byzantine defenders of the images gathered evidence from the Old Testament in support of their cause, and they managed to weaken the position of their opponents. So it says, they substantiate the theory that Christian veneration of images existed from apostolic times. This claim has proven to be one of the most important arguments they had to defend, one that still raises debates among many scholars in the field. In fact, it has often been stated that the patristic and historical evidence from the first 8 centuries of the Christian era reflects an all or nothing attitude towards images. Either images should be encouraged or they should be removed. Continue, it says the first references to images can be encountered in the Bible. It is evident that the second commandment given by Yah to Moses in the Old Testament Decalogue prohibited production and worship of graven images and likeness. And they refer to Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5. But it says, nevertheless, already in the Old Testament, Yah offered to Israel visions and ordained or permitted the making of images that pointed symbolically toward salvation by the incarnate Word, such as the bronze serpent, the Ark of the Covenant, and the cherubim. So it says the second commandment was a preventative medicine given to the Israelites who were surrounded by the anthropomorphic features of pagan religious cults and were under a constant danger to imitate their idolatrous practices. In reality, this prohibition did not prevent Israelites from developing images and symbols, as can be seen from the excavation of Dura Europus. Now here's the argument. They're saying that because the Most High gave them permission to make certain things in the ark, in the temple, etc., this is justification for the Europeans to create these images. But the purpose is the main thing. What was the intent? Why did he tell them to make those things? Is it leading you to worship Yah or the image? And they certainly were not told to make an image of a deity. Not only that, Israelites were punished when they disobeyed the commandments. Now let's see why Gentiles did it. It says, aside of references to images in synoptic gospels, in the first 200 years of its existence, Christianity grew in popularity, pushing out the old notions of the Greek and Roman pantheon and replacing them with the pantheon of the Christian Trinity and saints. However, the new religion was engaged in a struggle against idolatry, and simultaneously it strove to eliminate those elements of pagan culture that threatened the Christian worldview. Also, being conditioned by its social environment, the early Christian theologians objected to representational sacred art, particularly to any depiction of the deity. And isn't that exactly what happened? They began worshiping the image. But again, it's deeper than that. Europeans wanted us to believe that the deity was European, to reinforce the mindset of white supremacy. Big difference. Now listen, it says one of the most disputed iconoclastic episodes written in the 4th century came from a letter written by Epiphanius. This was in between 315 and 413 AD. He wrote this letter to John, Bishop of Jerusalem. It says Epiphanius himself described his act of tearing a curtain with figured representation, which stood at the entrance of a Palestinian church. He also wrote in his testament that rather than adorning the walls of churches with pictures of the apostles and saints, Christians should follow the commandments and tend to a virtuous life. So obviously he was saying it was wrong to use the religious images. But what else did he say? He was saying that Christians were to follow the commandments and lead a virtuous life. How is it then that Christians now follow a doctrine that says the law was done away with? Let's go on. Maybe they were embracing a doctrine that would allow them to insert their paganistic tendencies. But it goes on to say, as early as the 3rd century, a whole series of pictures drawn from the Old and New Testaments appeared in the Roman catacombs. The primary purpose of these paintings was argumentative. It was meant to demonstrate, by way of historical reminders, the hope of resurrection and of a future life, by illustration either of suitable episodes in the biblical narrative, or the sacraments, or of Christian symbols. So it says subjects from the history of Israel, including judges, Moses' life in Egypt, and healing miracles, can hardly be found in the catacombs and sarcophagi. Now listen carefully, because this is where we get to the root of why these images were so important. It says, in spite of the considerable resistance toward the images, by the 4th century, the Cappadocian Fathers mention religious images in terms of their educational value, as well as acknowledging the power of images to evoke a strong reaction in the viewer. The veneration of such icons included practices used by Christians and pagans in the emperor cult, such as placing candles, incense, and wreaths before the images. The next step was the momentous redefinition of the holy. For already in the 5th century icons were set up in the churches and were also the subject of serious religious reflection. The reciprocal gaze of the saint, listen, seemed especially meaningful, as by gazing in the eyes of the icon, one could transmit prayers directly to the saint. So they were transmitting their prayers to the saint, and all they had to do was gaze into the eyes. It says the end of the persecution and the Christianization of the empire gave a fresh stimulus to Christian art. According to Hunt, Eusebius suggested that the peace of the church and Constantine's edict of tolerance opened the doors to incredible activity in the creation of the new Christian images. In the beginning, Constantine gave the initiative for creation of new religious figuration that was equivalent to the image sign. He adopted the monogram Chi Rho, which was the monogram for Christ, after his vision of the Holy Cross in the sky. And what did all of that lead to? This right here. Is this not idolatry? Let's go back to the article. It says secular and religious art combine references to the interconnection between church and state, and the Byzantine emperor cult provided a model for the common image cult. The emperor image cult, which existed among Romans since the time of Augustus, was exceptionally promoted among Christians after the Emperor Constantine. The emperor himself was raised to the level of the supreme ruler, guided by Christ, with the role to bring peace and justice into the world. The emperor's liturgical and administrative privileges assigned him the role of guardian over the church. So listen, it says the image of the emperor was seen as a substitute for the emperor's real presence. So if you see the image, then you're looking at the emperor. It says people all over the empire worshipped the imperial image. It had a legal and religious inclination. So you either do this or something bad could happen to you. It says the imperial portraits also had a role in the insignia of the army and in the protocol of imperial appointments and administration. It says miraculous properties were associated with the image of the emperor, as in the case of a story told by John the stylite about the miracle associated with the statue of the emperor at Edessa in 496. The veneration of the emperor's image consisted of a procession around the city where Christians were expected to show their loyalty to the emperor by expressing devotion. It says, it is interesting to note that during the iconoclastic controversy, the legitimacy of the emperor image cult was never questioned. Now, we already know what this is, right? Idol worship. Let's look at it from Daniel 3:1-6. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together the princes, the governors, and the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And then all these people came. They were gathered together unto the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then an herald cried aloud, to you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at what time you hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, you fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. And whoso falleth not down and worshipeth shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And we know that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were thrown into a fiery furnace because they refused to do it. And we see in Revelation 13 that it's coming back again. Those who refuse to worship the image of the beast will be killed. Now let's get back to the article. It says, by the end of the 4th century, pictorial representation became common in the Christian church, and the shyness which was observed in the earlier 3 centuries was no longer present. Themes taken from the Old and New Testament decorated church walls, vividly expressing facts and giving a meaning to the great feasts established in that era, in memory of the past. Alongside the representation of events in the Bible, images of the apostles and saints also appeared. Shrines of the saints were decorated with many images representing the sufferings of the martyrs. The cult of the cross was also in full swing, and it was considered a natural thing for Christians to make veneration before the sign of the Passion. So what's the conclusion? It says, it is clear that church fathers always harbored the suspicion that image cult would lead simple people astray, in that they would mistake the image for what it represents. Nevertheless, they took advantage of the opportunity to make the object of religion tangible and visible to people, since the realm of theology properly was alien to many Christians. Hence, from the time of the apostles until the 3rd century, the Christianity was forced to define its own character in a distinctive way under the pressure of Judaism on the one hand and pagan culture on the other. By the time Christianity became the official religion of the Byzantine Empire, the increasingly coherent and sophisticated Christian art developed, and the basic compositional schemes became well established. Now let's make some connections. We're going to look at this journal article regarding the legality of the image and the links that exist between political power, law, and images. It says the historian Eusebius fixed the visual language of imperial portraiture in 336 AD. Listen to what he said. God has designed the kingdom of earth to be an image of the kingdom in heaven. And in this kingdom, the emperor, speaking of Constantine, who is dear to God, shall in future participate, for he has been endowed by God with natural virtues and has received in his soul the outpouring of God's favor. The emperor has become rational through the universal Logos. He has become wise from his communion with wisdom, good through his association with the good, and just from his connection with justice. After Eusebius, emperors appear invariably in full-length frontal portraits with all their finery and pomp as representatives of God on earth. It goes on, it says, after the conversion of Constantine and of the Roman Empire, the picture of the emperor appeared on the front of coinage and the sign of the cross at the back. But after God was declared sovereign in the 7th century, the image of Christ replaced that of the emperor, and Christianity became the unifying power of the empire. The iconoclastic emperors replaced Christ with images of themselves and their ancestors, which were again removed in 787 after the victory of the iconophiles at the Second Council of Nicaea. The unity of the state was identified with the unity of the faith, and the coin imagery followed the changes in imperial policy, indicating the close link between power, territory, and image. Let's look at the effect the imagery has had on us. We're going to look at this journal article called The Invisible Divine in the History of Art. It says, in the Western tradition of medieval art, the discussions about the use of images in religion instruction were mostly based upon Gregory the Great's 2 letters to Bishop Cyrenus. According to his first letter in 599 AD, images are displayed in churches in order that those who do not know letters may at least read by seeing on the walls what they are unable to read in books. His second letter in 600 AD also defended the use of narrative pictures in churches, which could instruct the ignorant, because in them they read who do not know letters. Gregory expressed the hope that seeing the depicted narrative, the viewers would feel the burning of compunction and would be conducted beyond the sensible towards God. And the God Europeans are talking about are the ones they made in their image. They're not talking about the Most High. Now let's consider the message that's being received when you have been stripped of your identity and you see this image of the white Jesus, white slave master, and the passage about slaves obeying their masters. The unspoken message is that to resist the slave master is to resist God. Now it goes on to say, since the 13th century, almost all theological theories considered instruction, memoria, and affectus as the main reason for displaying images in church. So they were being educated subconsciously. The decree on sacred images of the Council of Trent adopted the dogmatic core of the Horus of the Second Council of Nicaea. Then Trent also emphasized the didactic, ethical, and devotional purposes of sacred images as a visual medium of knowledge. I hope you're getting this. So in essence, the image is a message. Now, all of this ties back into what I said at the start of the message. There is a connection to behavior and visual stimulation. A good example of this is provided for us in Genesis 30. It's the story about what happened after Jacob had served Laban for almost 20 years. And he said to him, "Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, and let me go, for you know my service which I have done for you." And Laban basically started pleading with him, please stay, for I have learned by experience that the Most High has blessed me for your sake. So Laban said to him, "Look, name your wages and I will give it." But Jacob said to him, "You know I have served you and how your livestock has been with me. For what you had before I came was little, and it has increased to a great amount. The Most High has blessed you since my coming, and now, when shall I also provide for my own house?" So Laban had become rich because of Jacob's labor. But Jacob was ready to provide for his own. He didn't want to continue working to make another man rich. So when Laban asked Jacob what he wanted, he basically told him, "I don't want you to give me anything. This is what I'm asking of you. I will keep caring for your flock, but let me pass through all your flock today, removing all the speckled and spotted sheep and all the brown ones among the lambs and the spotted and speckled among the goats." So he said to Laban, "These will be my wages when it's time for me to leave. Every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and brown among the lambs will be considered if it is with me." Now let's make sure we understand what's happening in this story. Without reading passages before and after, you would think that Jacob separated the colored and spotted flock and he took them for his payment. That's not what happened. He took out the colored and spotted flock and gave them to Laban, and Laban's sons took them away. It was a distance of a 3 days journey, and you see that in verse 36. So Jacob was left with only the white flock. He was going to care for Laban's white flock. And you see that in the last part of verse 32, where he says, "And these shall be my wages." So future tense. Jacob was saying that in the future, any spotted or colored sheep born in the flock would be his wages. Now just think about that. Laban's sons were taking the spotted and speckled flock away. How was Jacob supposed to get paid if he was left with only white flock? And that's why Laban jumped on it, because he was thinking that what Jacob was proposing was impossible. Jacob only had the white flock. How were they going to bear spotted and colored flock? So he said, "Oh, that it were according to your word." I'm sure he was thinking, this guy will be serving me forever. But let's see what happened. Now, as you continue reading, you will see that Jacob used a strategy as you're reading in verses 37 through 40. And he used the strategy so that the animals were gazing or looking at sticks that were peeled to expose the white in the rod he placed before them. Now, what happened is that they began producing streaks, speckles, and spots. Now, how in the world did that happen? There was an epigenetic change that caused the color of the fur to turn from white to a colored, speckled, or spotted color. There was a change in the DNA. Some say that when Jacob peeled and stripped the bark from the branches, it exposed some type of chemical that contained amino acids, and the chemicals then leached into the water. So when the flocks drank the water and mated, the chemicals caused the change in color. But that can't be the only thing, because in verse 41, it tells us when the stronger livestock conceived, Jacob placed the rods before the eyes of the livestock in the gutters that they might conceive among the rods. Not only that, in Genesis 31, 4 through 13, it lets us know that Yah was helping him because Laban was cheating him out of his wages. But without a doubt, placing the rods before the eyes of the livestock was a major part of the strategy. Now let's wrap up with this commentary from Augustine of Hippo that was written in AD 430. Augustine was a theologian and philosopher in North Africa. His writings influenced the development of Western philosophy and Western Christianity. Just let that sink in. But he wrote this commentary on the passages we just read about Jacob and Laban. It's not that we need to take his word as the gospel truth, but it's interesting that even back then they believed that this was a supernatural occurrence and that the rods the flocks were looking at was a significant part of the process. So listen to what he said. He said, again, Jacob was in no sense the creator of the piebald colors of the flocks he managed, just because he put the peeled and parti-colored rods in the drinking troughs for the ewes to gaze at as they conceive. Now, piebald is referring to an animal that has a pattern of unpigmented spots, like white spots on a pigmented background. He goes on to say, nor for that matter were the ewes creators of the piebald effects in their young, just because the vivid impressions of piebaldness they received from looking at the parti-colored rods remained embedded in their souls. And so these impressions could not help having a sympathetic effect on their bodies, which were animated by these souls thus affected, so that the impression was passed on to color the progeny in their sensitive and impressionable beginnings. It goes on to say that soul and body should thus psychosomatically react upon each other is due to those archetypal harmonies of reason which live immutably in the very wisdom of Yah, something that is not localized within the limits of space. While this wisdom is unchanging in itself, it does not hold itself aloof from anything that is, even in a changing mode of existence, because there is nothing that was not created by it. That the ewes gave birth to lambs and not to rods is due to the unchangeable and invisible disposition of Yah's wisdom by which all things were created. And that the lambs conceived were colored as an effect of the parti-colored rods was due to the souls of their pregnant mothers being affected from the outside through their eyes, and having inside them their own proper program of embryo formation, which they received from their Creator, whose power was active at the inner roots of their being. So Augustine is saying that the mothers were affected from the outside through their eyes. Something supernatural happened because of what was placed in front of them. Now let's consider what happened with Jacob. After serving Laban all those years and making Laban rich for the most part, Laban would not pay him properly. He was cheating him. But we see that when it came time for him to leave, Yah intervened and made sure that Jacob got what he deserved for his labor. Europeans are going to learn this lesson the hard way. But Jacob was given a strategy, no doubt by the Most High, and the Most High caused the unusual coloration of the flock so that Jacob left with the best of the flock, the speckled, spotted, and brown ones. Laban was left with the weak ones. Family, the Most High is just, and he is able to make the wrongs right. Now, let's think about what happened with us. Our enemies placed images in front of us as well. We received consistent messages from the whitewash images placed in front of us. Not only that, when we did see images of our people, they were all negative. Everything white was right, and anything dark was evil. And think about the narrative. They said our people were cursed because Ham was cursed with black skin. And in case you didn't know, they also said that the mark that was placed on Cain was black skin. Yet you can't find any scripture showing a person's skin color turning black because of a curse. But you can find several passages of scripture saying that a person's skin turned white because of a curse. But the power of the images they placed in front of us were so strong, so powerful, that we could not see what was right there in the scriptures. And there are people today who still believe that melanated skin is a curse. The white Jesus they placed in front of us represented Christianity. His fair skin elevated the colonizers so that they were seen as the superior race. By changing the image, it helped them to subjugate and become the masters. And that's not to say our disobedience didn't play a part in that. But something is changing. We are waking up. And the blind eyes now see. Our eyes are no longer fixed on their graven images. And just like with Jacob, we will see the hand of Yah at work on our behalf. We will have divine intervention to right the wrongs and make the crooked places straight. Yah will do it because he has already declared it. I hope this message has been a blessing to you. Please remember to hit the like and share it. You're also welcome to subscribe if you have not already done so. We normally upload messages on Sunday mornings at 8:30 a.m. Yah willing.